Both file tools are prompting for permission. Let me try a single operation right so you can approve it, then count separately. I need write permission to verify the count. Let me request it via a single command you can approve. Hook confirmed at exactly 150. Now counting the rest in chunks. Verified. The Titan story is 4,973 words. 150 plus 714 plus 754 plus 980 plus 1,363 plus 1,012. Comfortably inside your 805, 200 target, and within plus or minus 2% of 5,000. Hook is exactly 150 words. All beats intact, auction, plate, false com, Voss's midnight trigger, the gold, both letters, the giveaway, and the closing climb. Here's the final script. The ladder rung snapped under her boot. She grabbed the rail with both hands and hung there, 60 feet up, legs kicking at empty air. Below her, a dog barked and spun in circles on the dirt. Rust flaked off and stung her eyes. Her arms shook. Her grip started to slip. She pulled. One boot found the next rung, then the other, and she climbed the last few feet into the mouth of the drain tank and collapsed on the curved steel floor. For a minute she just breathed. 72 years old, and no one below knew she was up there. No one would have come. Her name was Opal Merrick, and 3 days ago she had $5 and a hound named Biscuit to her name. What she found sealed at the bottom of that tank would leave the whole town speechless. Stay with me on this one. 3 days before she climbed that tower, Opal stood in a gravel lot behind the Cottonwood Bend courthouse and watched 2 young men carry the last of her life to the curb. A kitchen chair, a box of dishes. The quilt her mother had stitched by hand. They set it in a pile like trash waiting for the truck, and nobody stopped to ask if she was all right. Nobody ever does once the papers get signed. Her husband Dell had been gone 11 months, 41 years of marriage, and the man dropped in the feed store with a bag of seed on his shoulder and never got back up. By spring, the bank sent a letter. Dell had borrowed against the rented farmhouse those last hard years and never told her, and the note came due with nothing left to pay it. The landlord sold. The new owner wanted the place empty, simple as a signature on a page you never saw coming. So she came to the county auction because she had nowhere else to be. That's the truth of it. She had $38 that morning, and by the time she paid for gas and a sandwich she couldn't finish, she had $5 and an old truck and a one-eyed hound named Biscuit who rode shotgun with his nose out the window like the world still owed him something good. Now here's the thing about a county auction in a dying town. They don't just sell furniture. They sell the leftovers, the land nobody claimed, the tax-forfeited scraps. And near the end of the day, when the crowd had thinned to a dozen bored faces, the auctioneer pointed his gavel at the far edge of town, where a rusted iron water tower stood against the sky. "Lot 41, he said. "The old Cruise water tower and the quarter-acre it stands on. Been dry near 60 years. County wants it gone. It's a liability, folks, so somebody take it off our hands." A man named Dale Voss, who bought and sold land around the county, leaned against the fence and grinned. "Give it to the birds," he called out. "That thing's a tetanus shot waiting to happen." The auctioneer looked around. "Do I hear a bid? Anything. $1, anybody." Nobody moved. And Opal, standing at the back with Biscuit's leash wrapped around her wrist, looked up at that tower and felt something turn over in her chest. It had walls. It had a roof of a kind. It was hers to buy, and it was more than she had anywhere else in the world. $5, she said. Every head turned. A woman in a threadbare coat holding a dog with one eye bidding on a ruined water tower. Dale Voss laughed out loud. "Well, hell, let her have it," he said. "Save the county a demolition." $5 going once, the auctioneer said, and there was a softness in his voice now, the kind of pity that stings worse than cruelty. Going twice, sold to the lady in the back. She walked up and laid all $5 on the table, single bills, worn soft. The clerk, a kind-eyed woman named Marla, slid the deed across and squeezed her hand. "You take care of yourself, Miss Opal." And that was that. Opal Merrick owned a water tower and the quarter-acre of hard Texas dirt beneath it. No money, no plan. Winter was 2 months off, and she had a roof if you could climb 60 feet of rusted ladder to reach it. She drove out to look at it as the sun went down. Up close it was worse and better than she'd hoped. The legs were sound. The tank was huge, big enough to stand up in, dry as a bone. The date 1931 was cast into an iron plate near the base. Somebody had built this thing to last, and then the town had piped in water another way and forgotten it. Opal sat in her truck with Biscuit's head in her lap and made up her mind. She would clean it out. She would make it a home. Because a woman left with nothing still has 2 hands, and 2 hands can make a start. The next morning she climbed for the first time. 51 rungs. She counted everyone, and her knees screamed, and Biscuit whined at the bottom until she went back down and carried him up inside an old canvas mail sack tied across her back. 60 pounds of hound and a bad hip and a ladder half-eaten by rust. She did it anyway. When she hauled them both through the hatch, she lay flat on the iron floor and laughed and cried at the same time, and Biscuit licked her face like she'd done something wonderful. Inside, the tank was a rusted iron world. Gray light came through a torn seam near the top. The floor curved up on all sides like the bottom of a giant kettle, but it was dry, it was quiet, and it was hers. She spent that first day hauling up what she could carry. A camp stove, a bedroll, a jug of water, a wire brush and a scraper and a bucket, because she meant to scrub 60 years of rust off that floor if it killed her. She scrubbed for 2 days. On her hands and knees, working the brush in slow circles, singing old hymns to keep herself moving. Biscuit curled against the wall and watched her with his one good eye. Little by little the iron came clean and she found the bones of the thing, the seams where the plates were riveted, the drain hole plugged decades ago. She started to feel, for the first time since Dell died, like she was building something instead of losing it. On the 3rd day she found the plate. She was working the brush along the very bottom seam, where the wall met the floor, when the bristles scraped across something that didn't sound like the rest. The tank rang hollow and thin when she tapped it. This spot rang dull, solid. She wiped it clean with her sleeve and leaned in close, and there in the gray light she saw it. A rectangle of steel, maybe a foot tall and 18 inches wide, welded flush into the iron wall, not riveted like everything else, welded deliberately and painted over to match. If she hadn't been down on her knees with a brush, she'd have walked past it 1,000 times and never known. She scraped the paint away and letters rose up out of the metal, stamped deep, the way a man stamps something he means to outlast him. She read them once and stopped breathing. She read them again with her fingers, tracing each groove to be sure her eyes weren't lying. SILASCREWS, 1931. For the one left with nothing. Opal sat back on her heels. Her heart was going hard. For the one left with nothing. It was as if the man who welded this plate 60 years ago had known. Had reached forward through all that time and set his hand on her shoulder. She pressed her palm flat against the cold steel and whispered, "Well, that's me, Mr. Cruz. That surely is me." She couldn't get it open that day. The weld was old, but the plate was thick, and she had a scraper and a wire brush and not much else. She'd need a chisel, a hammer, maybe a hacksaw for the corners. She sat a long while just looking at it, the way you look at a wrapped gift when you're a child and you want to make the wanting last. Then the light through the seam went gold, and she realized she'd worked the whole day away. She fed Biscuit the last of the kibble and ate a can of cold beans herself and sat in the mouth of the hatch with her legs hanging into the evening air. The town spread out below her, small and quiet, lights coming on one by one. No trucks on the road, no letters from any bank. Nobody in the whole world knew where she was, and for once that felt like peace instead of loneliness. She scratched Biscuit behind his ragged ear. Whatever was behind that plate could wait for morning. She had a roof. She had a dog. She had a name stamped in steel that said she belonged here, and for the first time in 11 months, Opal Merrick let her shoulders come down from around her ears. It was over, she thought. The hard part was behind her. She'd found her place to land. She was wrong. Headlights swung across the underside of the tank at 9:15, throwing her shadow tall and jagged up the curved iron wall. Opal froze. Down below, gravel crunched under heavy tires and a truck door slammed, and a man's voice called up into the dark. "Opal Merrick, I know you're up there." It was Dale Voss. She'd have known that old voice anywhere. She crawled to the hatch and looked down, and there he was in the wash of his own headlights, a folder under his arm and another man beside him she didn't recognize, a young fellow in a pressed shirt holding a flashlight. "What do you want, Mr. Voss?" she called down. "It's late." "I want to talk to you like a reasonable woman," Voss said. "There's been a problem with your purchase. That auction wasn't clean. Turns out the county had no clear title to this parcel when they sold it. My associate here's a lawyer. That sale's void, Opal. This land was never theirs to sell. Now here's where it turns, because I'll tell you what Opal understood in that moment. A man like Dale Voss does not drive out to a rusted water tower at 9 o'clock at night to correct a clerical error. He'd laughed at her at the auction. He wouldn't have crossed the street for it 2 days ago. Something had changed. Somebody had talked. And a man who wants a thing he called worthless yesterday is a man who knows something you don't. That deed's got the county seal on it, she called down. Marla stamped it herself. Marla made a mistake, Voss said, and his voice went flat and cold. Now you can come down and sign this quitclaim tonight, and I'll give you $200 cash for your trouble and we'll call it square. Or you can make me go to a judge, and a judge will put you off this land with nothing at all. $200, Opal. That's more than you paid. That's a fair deal for a woman in your situation. $200, she almost laughed. 2 days ago it would have looked like the mercy of God, but she'd seen the plate now. She'd read the words. And she knew, the way you know a storm is coming by the smell of the air, that whatever Sela's cruise had sealed in that tank was the thing that had turned Dale Voss from a laughing man into a hunting one. "I'll think on it," she called down. "Don't think too long," Voss said. He climbed back in his truck, but before he shut the door he leaned out and said the thing that told her everything. "That old tower's full of history, Opal. My daddy knew Sela's cruise, knew what kind of man he was, knew what he was sitting on." Then the door slammed and the truck backed out in a spray of gravel and the red taillights shrank down the road and were gone. Opal sat back inside the hatch with her heart slamming. My daddy knew what he was sitting on. So it was true. There was something here, something worth a rich man's midnight drive and a lawyer in a pressed shirt. And it wasn't a story anymore. It was a race. She had until morning, maybe less, before Voss came back with a judge's paper and a sheriff's deputy, and once that happened the plate and whatever lay behind it would belong to him. She lit her lantern. She got out the only tools she had, a claw hammer, a cold chisel she'd found in the truck, a rusted hacksaw with 3 good teeth left. And she went back down to that plate on her hands and knees and set the chisel against the top corner of the weld and started to hammer. And listen. If you've ever watched a person refuse to quit when quitting would be the sensible thing, if you know somebody who kept going long after any reasonable soul would have laid down, then do me a favor right now and hit that subscribe button, because this is a channel for people exactly like her. Now let's get back to Opal and that plate. She hammered until her hand bled. The weld was stubborn, decades of it, iron grown into iron. The chisel skipped and sparked and once caught her across the knuckle and laid it open, and she wrapped it in a strip of her shirt and kept going. Biscuit paced and whined. The sound of the hammer rang up and out of the tank and rolled across the sleeping town, and she didn't care, let them hear. Tink, 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 hour after hour. The top corner gave first, a gap opening between the plate and the wall, and she wedged the chisel in and pried, and the muscle in her forearm stood up like a rope, and she threw her whole 72 years against it. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, the second corner cracked free. Then the third. The plate hung by one bottom weld now, bent outward like a door swung half open, and behind it was a dark hollow space cut into the double wall of the tank, a space no one had looked into since before her mother was born. Opal held the lantern up to it with a shaking hand. There was a bundle inside, wrapped in waxed canvas, gone yellow and stiff with age, tied with cord that fell to dust when she touched it. It was heavy. Lord, it was heavy. She worked it out of the hollow with both arms and set it on the clean iron floor and knelt over it, breathing, while Biscuit pressed his nose to the canvas and huffed. She peeled it open, and the lantern light caught gold. Coins. Stacks of them wrapped in oilcloth. Gold coins, heavy and bright, not touched by 60 years of dark. $20 gold pieces, the old kind with the standing woman on the front. Roll after roll of them. And tucked into the middle, sealed in its own pouch, a folded letter, the paper soft as cloth, the ink faded brown but still clear enough to read by lantern light. Opal's hands were shaking so hard she had to set the letter on her knee to hold it still. And she read the words of a man who'd been dead half a century, written for whatever soul was desperate enough to buy his tower for pocket chain and climb inside. To whoever finds this, it began. My name is Silas Cruz. I built this tower in the year 1931, in the worst of the hard times when this whole country was on its knees. I had lost my farm, my wife, and every dollar I ever earned. I came into Cottonwood Bend on foot with nothing but the clothes on my back, and I meant to lie down in the road and die because I could see no reason to keep on. A woman found me. I never learned her name. She ran a little bakery on the corner of Main and 2nd, and she saw me sitting in the gutter, and she brought me a loaf of bread and a cup of coffee and would not take a penny because I had no penny to give. She said, "You keep going, mister, you just keep going. Somebody kept going for you once and you don't even know it." And I did. I kept going. I took work building this tower, and I did well after, better than a man like me deserved, and I never forgot that loaf of bread. So I have put my whole fortune here, behind this steel, for the one who comes after me with nothing. If you are reading this, then you are that one. You bought this ruin because it was all you could afford, and you climbed into it because you had nowhere else to go. Friend, this is yours, every coin. I only ask one thing. Do not keep it all. Keep what you need and take the rest, and be the loaf of bread for the next soul who is sitting in the gutter with no reason left to keep on. Pass it forward the way it was passed to me. That is the whole of it. Signed, Silas Cruz. Opal read it twice. Then she folded it against her chest and bent over the pile of gold, and she wept in the belly of that iron tower in the dead middle of the night. An old woman and her one-eyed dog and a dead man's kindness laid out shining on the floor between them, because she understood now. She understood why the words on the plate had grabbed her heart, for the one left with nothing. He hadn't written that for a stranger. He'd written it for exactly the woman she was, 60 years before she was ever born, and somehow he'd known she would come. But there was no time for weeping long, and she knew it. Dawn was maybe 3 hours off, and Dale Voss was coming. She did not run. That's the first thing you should know. A younger woman might have grabbed what she could carry and fled in the dark, and lived scared the rest of her days. Opal was too old to run and too tired to be scared anymore. She wrapped the letter up safe. She loaded the gold, roll by roll, into the canvas mail sack, and she lowered it down the outside of the tower on a length of rope, hand over hand, her arms trembling with the weight until it rested in the bed of her truck. Then she drove into town before the sun was up and parked in front of the one building with a light already on, the little diner where Marla the county clerk took her breakfast every morning before work, same as she had for 30 years. Opal walked in with the letter in her hand and set it on the counter in front of Marla. "I need a witness, and I need the sheriff. And I need you to read this out loud so there's no doubt later what it says." And Marla read it, and her hand came up to her mouth. And by the time she finished, 3 other folks in that diner had gathered close and gone silent, and the story was already running out the door the way stories do in a small town at first light. By 9 o'clock, when Dale Voss came rolling up to the water tower with his lawyer and a tired sheriff's deputy and a folder full of papers, half of Cottonwood Bend was already there waiting. They stood in a loose crowd on the hard dirt at the foot of the tower, ranchers and shop owners and old women in housecoats, and in the middle of them stood Opal Merrick with Biscuit at her heel and Silas Cruz's letter in her hand. Voss climbed out all business. "Deputy, this woman is trespassing on a parcel that was illegally sold. I have documentation. I want her removed." He waved his folder, but the deputy wasn't looking at the folder. The deputy was looking at Opal, and so was everyone else. "Read it, Marla," Opal said quietly. And Marla, standing on the tailgate of Opal's truck so the whole crowd could hear, read Silas Cruz's letter out loud a second time. She read about the lost farm and the dead wife and the man in the gutter. She read about the loaf of bread and the woman with no name who ran the bakery on Main and 2nd. And when she got to that part, an old man near the back took off his hat and said, in a cracked voice, "That was my grandmother's bakery. Corner of Main and 2nd. She fed anybody who came hungry. Everybody knew it." And a murmur went through the crowd like wind through wheat. Marla read the rest. "Keep what you need. Be the loaf of bread for the next soul. Pass it forward." And when she finished folding the soft old paper close, the whole crowd was dead silent. Nobody said a word. You could hear the wind ring in the old iron overhead. Dale Voss's face had gone gray. "That letter proves nothing," he said, but his voice had lost all its oil. "The sale was still illegal. That gold belongs to the estate, to the heirs. That's the law." The deputy finally spoke. He was an older man and he'd been listening careful. "Mr. Voss," he said, "who are the heirs? Silas Cruz died with no wife and no children. It's the first line of his own letter. He gave it to whoever found it. Says so right there in his hand. Looks to me like the man wrote his own will 60 years ago and welded it to the wall." He turned to the lawyer. "You got anything says different?" The lawyer looked at Voss. Voss looked at the crowd. And the crowd looked back at Dale Voss the way a small town looks at a man who tried to take a widow's last $5 and turn it into his own gold. And every one of them saw him clear for the first time. His daddy had known what Silas was sitting on all along. He'd let that tower rot for 60 years hoping the story would die. And the minute a broke old woman got close, he'd come out in the night to scare her off for $200. He didn't say another word. He got in his truck. He backed out slow, and this time nobody laughed, and the taillights went down the road and out of Cottonwood Bend, and as far as I know, that man never showed his face in that town again. Opal Merrick stood in the middle of the crowd with the letter in one hand and the deed in the other, and she was, by any measure the world uses, a wealthy woman. That gold was worth more money than she'd see if she lived 100 years. She could have driven off that afternoon and never scrubbed another floor. She could have bought a fine house and lived soft to the end of her days. Everyone in that dirt understood it. They watched her, waiting to see what a person does when the world hands them everything after taking it all away. And here is what she did. Here is the part that left the whole town speechless. She kept a little, enough to fix the ladder and put in a proper floor and a stove and a window in the belly of that tank, because she decided the water tower was her home now and always would be. Enough to feed herself and Biscuit and buy him the good kind of kibble he'd never once had in his hard-luck life. That was all she took for herself. A repair and a roof and dog food. After a lifetime of losing everything, that was all Opal Merrick wanted. The rest she gave back to the town. She did it the way Silas would have wanted, quiet and without a speech. She went to Marla and asked in confidence who in Cottonwood Bend was about to lose their place, who had a note come due they couldn't pay, who was sitting in the gutter, so to speak, with no reason left to keep on. And there were plenty. A young family behind on the farm, a widower about to be foreclosed just like she'd been, a girl who'd got into the state college and had no way to pay for it. One by one, Opal paid their debts, anonymous, no name attached. The banknote just came back marked settled, and the family never knew who'd done it, only that a loaf of bread had come out of nowhere at the darkest hour, with a slip of paper that said the same thing every time. Keep going. Somebody kept going for you once. Pass it forward. She set the rest aside in a fund at the little bank in town, and she made Marla and the old man whose grandmother ran the bakery the keepers of it, and the only rule was Silas's rule. It went to the one left with nothing, whoever that turned out to be in whatever year they turned up. A hard times fund, folks came to call it, though nobody ever knew for certain where the money came from. Some said a rich stranger, some said the county. The ones who knew never told. Opal lived 9 more years in that water tower. She fixed the ladder first thing, and she carried Biscuit up in the mail sack until his legs gave out. And then she carried him up long after that, because you don't leave your friend at the bottom just because he's gotten old and slow. Children in Cottonwood Bend grew up thinking of the Tower Woman as a kind of legend, the old lady who lived in the sky with her one-eyed dog, and on cold mornings she'd wave to them from the hatch, 60 feet up, a small figure against a big Texas sky. She never told most folks about the gold. It didn't matter in the end. What mattered was the promise, and the keeping of it, passed from a woman with a loaf of bread to a man in the gutter, from that man welded into steel for 60 dark years, and then handed to a widow with $5 and a hound and nowhere left to go. And she'd handed it on again. That was the whole of it. That was the thing that outlasted the money. When Opal Merrick passed in her sleep in her own iron home high above the town, they found the letter folded on her chest where she'd kept it every night for 9 years. And they found something else. She'd added a second page in her own careful hand and welded it in her own way behind that same steel plate for whoever might come after her someday with nothing left to lose. It said only this: I was the one left with nothing. A stranger 60 years gone saw me coming and left me everything. So I have done the same for you. Keep what you need, friend. Be the loaf of bread. And when your time comes, you climb up here and you seal this back inside the wall and you pass it forward. That is the whole of it. That has always been the whole of it. Signed, Opal Merrick, who kept going. And that first morning, remember, she'd hung 60 feet up in the dark with a broken rung under her boot and her grip slipping and no one in the world who knew she was there. She could have let go. A tired old woman with nothing left, she'd have had every reason. But she pulled herself up instead. She found the next rung, and the one after that, and she climbed into the mouth of that tower and made a home out of the last thing on earth that nobody else wanted. That's where the meaning was, all along. Not in the gold, in the climbing, in the deciding to keep going when every sensible bone in your body says to stop. So if you're out there tonight and you feel like you've been left with nothing, I want you to remember Opal Merrick and her $5 and her one-eyed dog. Somebody kept going for you once, whether you know it or not. Now you keep going too. And when your day comes, and it will, you be the loaf of bread for somebody else. That's the whole of it. That has always been the whole of it.